Accessibility.
Part 3 of 3,
Menu
and this is
expanded with
chapter
submenu.
11 of
On
the
page
production
8 of
titled
15.
70.
On paragraph 6. Line 10. Accessibility.
Taped on
Menu expanded
February
with
20th,
submenu.
2024.
Stadium and these on the very moment were made mainly to
Begin.
ask on field, as it were, spectators and fellow family about the outcome of the ever so important game from front row, peanut gallery and places in between with persons. How uncanny that we should all be as though taking the same call, turning away from the action to silence the ringers or take calls. At least subconsciously ask same attendees. To announce that spiraling football launched downfield had resulted in a "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" and "Is something wrong with your set right now?" Person similarly not in attendance reaching out. I mean, something beyond the challenges with maintaining the signals and connection? Has your show or whatever been preempted by persons not perilously captivated by their own mystified states of mind, were outright incensed as sure as certain others would feel delighted and steeped in marvel, as though appreciating greater than anyone what had felt like a break from subversion of formerly subjugated streams of signal in mandatory hourly preemption announcing global decisions during the time of peak crisis in and amid wartime transpiration. Whether from political or religious standpoint where the two terms were used interchangeably. Only especially where out of context. Our football game held in the United States, which was scarcely the only country experiencing this newest intrigue of the most uncommon day. Folks to soon enough learn. This was worldwide as sure as would be the signs preceding greater signs to grow in both frequency and fervency, with skyborne distresses and wonders to as prophesied light up the globe, already taking on inexplicable visual, angelic, and apocalyptic shape. One marvel compounded by another, like conspiratorial clockwork, and Christians and Messianics worldwide concluding that their case for naming the age as Generation Apocalypse would soon be dressed up with the furnishings of conspiracy talk, and what does generate and uphold the same. The marvel involving unusual behavior in the animal kingdom also underway and attestable, as it was as if Noah was on the scene when animals of every kind rove about peculiarly on this day like mindless robotrons suddenly, as shown on the networks, beginning to cycle in circular clockwise rotation, nose to tail, without seeming to know which was either, and unable to break from their patterns for hours on end. Only the mules defied the clockwise only rotating when these across the globe did in counterclockwise position with hooves and claws against and cutting into ground, unervingly rotate and circle in concerted rebellion to nature ever known before. Night arrived sooner these days, and peculiarly so did day that would continue to. A grim occurrence that's formidable conclusions could be prognosticated in accordance with fitting scenarios. Farmer and non-farmer alike understanding as they see no rain, and attempt to push back into memory any impression of very rainbow, with grim forecasters of an imminent drought already portending and invoking talk of land-ravaging famine and then successor pestilence as more fun for the modern family. It wasn't only static electricity in the air that visibly streaked across the overpowered airwaves with very emphatic signs of the presence of digital junk infestation as chiefest plague form. Thus far, and which didn't offer enough information unto insight and emphatic predictability within a set context yet. The national news reporter only with slight exception pointing toward that manifestation to which he'd referred, or the infestation that defied the preeminence claim in what had been decided was a global assault and far less pandemic breakout in an electric seas grid work hardwired into our homes. And, dare I say it, continued he reluctantly, as though fearing to with its inciting description incriminate unto a conspiracy charge, even making way into our heads, when, in reference to another staying moniker to dominate the day in prime time profit global time, open circuit television, streams of signal in electrical current could in many an instance receive the most common of prompts. For instance, at the expense of suffering credulity, a disengaging and outright unplugging from even the common electrical outlets drilled into walls couldn't result in the sight and sounds featuring what was transmitted in strange appearances of these convening prophets suddenly arriving worldwide in town on some invisible steeds from on high, or silence their prophecy talk and warnings. Pull the plug. any sharpshooting technician or troubleshooter to advise in an attempt to commandeer and jumpstart devices that resets could be applied. We suddenly had to rework classifications and categories these days. Has anyone noticed? So the stories did later circulate long after spectators at the Super Bowl game had returned home. Folks ill-prepared to necessarily have to report on game's outcome in regards to that specific football toss to those not in attendance who hadn't called to inquire on unpreempted waves of signal that were still available. It had been only half-jokingly referred to as the play to sink the grid and to compulsorily invite us to primetime profit global time. Touchdown. Was she an interception or misfire or something resulting in the fumble instead of last-minute victory? How handsomely did the transpiration factor into any bets made with the bookies? Then to learn about this latest debacle of terrestrial design feeling nefariously tied to a despot most unreceptive to industry's competition idea. A sentiment shared as one reporter had a mind to ask same question from the newsroom. Turning away from the statistics involving RU4ZR and agricultural land pummelings as nature in all its forms had the opposite effect of a calming cup of hot tea to soothe the mind and body unto an elusive restful night. And in various ways persons detected subconsciously that there were more questions than answers. Friends, is all that we can promise. Jokes. If for no other reason than to get on with usual network programming and more optimistic things leading to renewed subscriptions and increased viewership. Involving the two men while opining persons speaking even despite themselves unto varying expectations of fate forms attesting for them that there was a reality demanded from what was non-normative as these two visitors. Long wild locks afrolic in the wind and tresses like sails atop windstorm waters agraze and beyond the midpoint of back in one instance and grazing the bottom of deepest depth of shoulders in another. Long overflowing white hooded garments appearing as white sheets impossibly dyed to a pearl scent sheen untainted, unstained. And as seen on those screens freely flowing on brisk winds of mysterious genesis to the point of adding definition to upper arms and torso beneath their wind-tossed garments. Whip up quite the talk as sagacious and all-seeing ones commanding regard in intelligent eyes and their manner of conceivable elocution and who easily fit the sagacious prophet look shoe as casting call non-invites. Men who some expectant persons from within the household of messianic faith see as prophets in fact visiting and who magically and mysteriously without satellites their own had. Again to the newsroom we turn. Shown up as maybe the first daring ones to take a stand against government sees that lamented its own overstep in alliance with designs conveniently requiring their mandate of same digital ubiquitous signal dominance suddenly unaccountably hardwired into, at best, a snag of a sword, and, at worst pernicious omen portenders bent on harnessing further confounding distresses unto an inverting capsizing of that reliably explainable reality defined as normative experience. Just how much could individuals comprising networks freely share their ideals, even as tethered to transpirations unto hard facts? Considered unthinkable as in time would go the very television and household entertainment devices from many a home to join computerware and bulky items susceptible to a good rusting to the various dumps, landfills, dropping stations and second-hand stores and refurbishment warehouses in the unlikely event of obtaining the televisions. For now computers in whatever their forms, they would just have to do. Again at the expense of circumventing disclosure that is writer's enjoyable proclivity to leave for later subtle or not revelation. The time had come to reassign meaning when using the relative term dependable conveniences. Lo and behold, together to behold the finicky nature of this thing as one scarcely knew for how long. The Sunday morning show's personnel was called in to sit behind the desks and cameras to, quote-unquote, make hay while the sun does shine. As though to alleviate the stresses and to befriend the persons crushed by bottom-dollar considerations. The programming had to the sets returned after 2 full months of a viewership apocalypse. The hosts of the various programs to provide thoughtful elucidation and context for the listening public who on computers read the news that the satellites and bandwidth providers were suddenly minding their understood roles again as live time was lending for only as long as God and maybe these prophets as thought could know. Folks, we've heard of rain seasons without rain and Christmas without window script for the movie 70. Chapter 11. Until Pulseless. Chapter by chapter. Author Ely James. All rights reserved. 2023 Folks. We've heard of rain seasons without rain and Christmas without snow, but who could ever fathom that the words of certain theorists and theoretical scientists would ring true when we together learn of enduring life without the smartest inventions of the most modern type? A smartphone is an smart device that during times of artificially intelligent robotrons reign and ubiquitous connectivity suddenly out-nuanced by formidable and less dependable technologically infused and empowered uniqueness when suddenly is required an upgrade of compliant will instead of some tangible thing seen as more comprehensible. To learn that pulling the plugs from the sockets did nothing to short-circuit this alien prime-time profit global time live feed stuff. And when should persons on their devices and displays the newest form of family view and share, at times with an R rating. As we'll see, in what only with effort could be unto a tolerating and that had become so otherworldly prominent that such had verily become too much to abandon to cerebral back-of-mind warehousing. Well, that's when folks started to question just who was on whose side. And on the world scene precisely who could such a thing favor? Are we suddenly assaulted by personified omens that's prevailing here only a select few can appreciate? Has the question been finally answered from the innovators in a sense maintaining presence in our homes who suddenly can now and necessarily say that there is such a thing as going too far beyond far itself? If it has, then by all appearances it was too late to apply an upgrade as patch fix. This is of Orwellian proportionality here. This is a defying of even fiction. This is unto an undoing of the senses common. Folks. The notoriously well-read and articulating men and women fashionably presenting fact more so as questions to open wide the consideration flow as similarly excited ones paid to opine on 30-second to a minute's worth of commentary. The word commentary or editor's note undoubtedly and invariably appearing beside or beneath their names on the screens as singular hosts under the influence of the aesthetic vibe of the curmudgeon impassionately sounding off for others' vicarious experience and pleasure. With an audience of one. If camera and production personnel were accepted, and sensory cognition as a wave of someone's creating unto a baffling of some elusive mind set to an orchestration and whether tomorrow, next week, next year or even 100 years from now. How to even record such a thing in the collective all that we experience in a world undone to aptly render justice for the history books and annals of time. And just who exactly are these nomadic ones appearing to have subverted the signals who are referred to by persons understanding who they represent as human extensions of God's mercy during what's sold to us as the end of common time? Something of a new sort for certain as, whether on this land or on that and at any demanded time of day or night. Sometimes both day and night within a 24-hour period as multitudinous visions had begun to streamline into some hidden portion of a once encrypted brain. Again, who's behind such a thing and in such a transpiration where there could be no such thing as unplugging from source? Or is that just it? That our tuning in is suddenly compulsory as though under design as we sit either entranced or as under enthralled ones disinterested yet with toothpicks skewered through the meat of the eyelids forced open with our limbs strapped tightly to the seats in front of the cinematic prompter and television screens, ask the persons whose larger matter was unto the questioning asking for answers to how snakes could possibly talk and arcs carry the whole of civilization beneath its deck in ape persons and how could a man, whether the name is Peter or Cephas or Yeshua ben Yosef, walk on water? So on as grown men otherwise dispositioned oft turn to repeating the questions asked in the earlier ages of youth and development. Is this their Jesus Christ or their so-called Antichrist? and how unsteady men did get when they were encouraged by a man to consider an affirmative yes to both. The good news. You ask. Readers along for the ride in the Daniel's 70th week prophecy is train?
That's it.
Season tickets for a stint